Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. I do hope that is the case. This is randomly a live stream that I'm doing because I'm so far behind today. It's half term and my kids are about, and that means there are children everywhere doing things and having to go places and having visitors. And anyway, I'm here now, but it is a little bit later than I would like. So it's easier for me to put this all together, all this content together in a live stream format. So we are going to do what I normally do, which is a case of military aid. We're going to talk about that, military equipment, talk about the different sort of regulations going about or not going about in terms of use against Russia, use of Western supplied weapons against Russia into Russian territory. We're going to do some look at obviously the military equipment that has been promised and pledged today, and other bits and pieces concerning what Russia has and recruitment and whatnot. And then we're going to go on to geopolitical stuff. So an awful lot of hopefully content for you guys. I am on my own. No one here to help me with questions and whatnot. I will try and get a handle on what you guys are saying, but that is going to be difficult for me because I am on my Todd. So I'm going to put you guys over there. If I look in that direction, that is because I'm just checking you guys out and seeing how you guys are. Right, okay. We are going to start with these topics. So it is all about, everyone is talking consistently about restrictions on Ukraine in terms of using those Western supplied weapons. Poland has now authorized Ukraine to use weapons it supplies to strike targets in Russia. That was stated by the Deputy Defense Minister. We have Czechia backing Ukraine striking Russian soil with Western provided weapons. We have Finland, Canada and Poland all together here. Don't prohibit Ukraine from striking targets, according to the Kyiv Independent. Representatives from those countries have issued separate statements regarding that. So that is good news. Now, the big one is about Germany. So Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, said something yesterday, and apparently that could be interpreted either way. And then this statement comes out from someone saying, a person familiar with Germany's government position confirms to Politico's Berlin playbook that the Chancellor did indeed mean what yesterday's remark, what was said in terms of Ukraine being able to strike back with Western weapons on Russian soil. Now, looking at the Berlin playbook, it's not actually wholly clear that he does indeed say that. So I don't know if there's 100% clarity on that. I always love this. Thank you so much. I've been looking every 5 minutes for the military aid video. Now I know why it did not come out. Just a very busy person. Okay, so Germany is an interesting one. We're going to have a look at German aid to Ukraine, who I'm due to get on at some point soon, just to talk about German aid to Ukraine, indeed. He says, well, let's look at the Bryansk incident, and this might tell us something. So what happened in Bryansk? Well, supposedly a German supplied air defense system, a Patriot system, was used to destroy 5, some say 4, some say 5, possibly even 6 bits of kit were taken out in Bryansk in May of last year, around about the same time. Okay, so it happened within an hour or two of all of these hits happened within an hour or two of each other. This was amazing. Everyone's like, oh my God, what was it? Was it Russian air defense system going wrong? And it eventually sort of came out that it was the Germans, especially since this picture came into, got onto the socials. And so no one was in any doubt that that was a Patriot system. It's now come out recently. There's a rumor that the Germans, well, if we look at this, but it did come yesterday from a German, very much a tabloid newspaper. So the AFU wants to use a Patriot system from Germany for strikes at its own discretion. Reaction: angry calls from Berlin and Washington, and threats to stop supplying anti-aircraft missiles if such an incident happens again. Ukraine is also not allowed to use Western air defense against attacks by Russian planes. It has to wait until the bombers have fired their cruise missiles and they're already flying over Ukrainian territory to try to shoot them down. Moreover, Russian forces are shelling Kharkiv Oblast also from Russian territory, and Ukraine has been forbidden to use Western weapons for retaliatory strikes on Russian territory. So that's the kind of idea about what's going on. Whether this is 100% the case is still a little bit unknown. So there are rumors flying about. So German aid to Ukraine is trying to wade through the long weeds of this story. According to public information, in the case of Germany, Ukraine was only allowed to defend itself on Ukrainian territory with the weapon system supplied by Germany, at least until yesterday. The fear of being drawn into war was still is very evident in the team around the German Chancellor and in the Chancellor himself. Despite this, Scholz stood up in front of the various press teams together with Macron at the Franco-German Ministerial Council at the Meseberg Castle yesterday. And when asked by a reporter whether he would draw a red line at the use of weapons supplied by Germany on Russian territory, announced that Ukraine would be allowed to do so as long as it acted within the framework of international law. Now, Macron also confirmed this by saying that weapons could be used against Russian systems that had attacked Ukraine within Russia. So there were some constraints added to this, some conditioning added to the use of weapons supplied by, one would think, France and Germany in this case. This appears to be very good news. It appears to be that both countries are now allowing Ukraine to use their weapons, Western weapons, against Russian targets in Russia. During his statement at the castle, Scholz made reference to 2 points I'd like to address, says German aid to Ukraine. Firstly, that he finds it strange that some people are discussing that Ukraine is not allowed to defend itself on Russian territory, and there has never been such a request by Germany. Now, that goes against the Bild's claim that Germany and indeed Washington had a go at Ukraine for using the Patriot system, the German provided system, to shoot down those targets in Bryansk. So something's not quite right here. Somebody's not telling the truth, either Scholz or the Bildt. And actually, either is possible, very plausible here. So there is that. Just very briefly on the latter point, says GAU, which is definitely wrong. So he's saying that Germany have not, there's never been a request by Germany. I want to make it that clear. Almost exactly a year ago, for example, he told the press that it is clear that, quote, the weapons we have supplied will only be used on Ukrainian territory. So GAU is saying that actually Scholz appears to be empirically incorrect in saying that he's never made a request. We can therefore only guess where the change in strategy comes from. But now to the second point regarding the discussions, he is most likely referring to an article published yesterday by Bildt that has generated a lot of discussion. Bildt writes that according to their information, the Ukrainian army used a Patriot air defense system supplied by Germany at least once to defend itself on Russian territory. The alleged reaction is said to have been angry calls from Berlin and Washington threatening to stop deliveries if this ever happens again. The incident to which Bildt refers is actually not a secret one, but one that's already been made public 10 months ago. And I've already reported on several times since. Okay, so we've talked about what actually happened. Interestingly, to my knowledge, this mission of the first Patriot fire unit supplied by Germany was never really covered in the German media and was generally hushed up or denied by German experts. In fact, the Bildt report published very recently, without even mentioning what happened in detail, is the first report in a major German news outlet that is at least somehow referencing this, as far as I can remember. In my opinion, this has to do either with a lack of knowledge or with the fact that the debate about the possibility of delivering the Taurus missile was in full swing at the time, so they didn't properly report it. But it's difficult to know what the actual truth is here. I mean, GAU kind of goes on to say, well, one simple explanation is, of course, that there were actually angry calls from Berlin and Washington, a persistent rumor, which, of course, I can neither refute nor prove. So he doesn't really cast an opinion as to the truth of that. But we do know that Scholz has definitely said two different things, right? Both yesterday and previously. In the end, we should always bear one thing in mind: if we are supplying Ukraine with such powerful and efficient weapon systems for self-defense, we should also allow Ukraine to use them in the best possible way. And to wait for another dozen cruise missiles to be fired at a major Ukrainian city at 3 o'clock in the morning can hardly be the best operational scenario. So whatever the situation is, and whether Germany had previously said you can't use these, and now they're saying the main point is that now they're saying that you can, like very publicly in a press conference with Macron. So now we've got Shashank Joshi and many others saying, well, okay, let's try and work out who has said they can use Western weapons on Russian territory. He says, okay, take out Denmark. That might have been wrong, but the Netherlands has said they can. So UK, France, Netherlands, Finland, Lithuania, Sweden, Czechia, now Canada, and in fact, Germany can be added to that. Jane Kiev says France, Lithuania, Latvia, Sweden, Estonia, Poland, Finland, Czech Republic, Great Britain, Netherlands, and as mentioned, Canada and Germany can be thrown onto that list. And all that remains is for the US to say, I mean, they're the main ones, right? And we're not quite sure what's going on there. Pressed on strikes inside Russia, Blinken says US's stance, and this has just come out. So the Kyiv Independent has just been reporting this, but this is literally from the last 25 minutes. Says that the US stance will adapt and adjust as necessary. So that is good indication that there will be a change. The US will adapt and adjust as necessary. It's ban on allowing Ukraine to hit targets inside Russia with US supplied weapons. That's not a formal kind of definitely they can, but it's an indication that things might well change. Now, what's interesting here then is that Putin has come out and formally said this, and I think this is quite underwhelming. Now, I don't have a full translation of what he said, but quote, they should be aware, says Putin, of what they are playing with. Putin responded on the current debate to allow Ukraine to strike within Russia with Western supplied weapons. Okay, during a press meeting in Uzbekistan, Putin said that NATO representatives, especially in Europe and elsewhere, should be aware of what they are playing with. And when speculating about the possibility of strikes with precision weapons on Russian territory, he emphasized that the constant escalation of the conflict, including strikes on peaceful city quarters, something that you do there, Putin, would lead to serious consequences. This is nothing we haven't already heard. Like the whole serious consequences is what is said after HIMARS, M777, F-16, Storm Shadows, etc., etc., etc. So actually, I think this is a case of calling Putin's bluff and Putin being full of guff. You know, all that Putin has to answer to these supposedly escalatory actions, all he has are nuclear missiles. And if he's not going to say that, then all he says is serious consequences. It's just empty rhetoric. So I think the US and Western allies can keep pushing the envelope, keep moving those red lines that are being, at the end of the day, self-imposed. Like, to be honest, if I was the US, I would have just said, unfortunately, I think that I guess that lift has gone, hasn't it? That taxi's been missed. But really, what the US should have said is nothing and just given Ukraine permission to do it just on the slide quietly. But now everyone's expecting full-on declarations. And if the US makes an official declaration, oh, you can use our missiles to do X, Y, and Z, that is much more escalatory than Ukraine just surreptitiously doing that anyway. And then, you know, it's making a mountain out of a molehill here. Now it becomes much more escalatory because it's been forced into the public limelight. And the US has to give a very formal public announcement to their change of approach. And I don't think that helps anyone out, really. Anyway, that's enough about talking of particularly the US position on striking Russian targets, although it's great to see European nations coming round to a sensible approach. Let's go on to the military aid and equipment. So this year, Ukraine can receive 1.7 billion euros from profits from frozen Russian assets. We've heard so many different numbers, 3 billion and then 2 billion, then 1.7 billion, although that's 1.7 billion euros. So that's about $2 billion from profits from frozen Russian assets. This was stated by the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. Quote, there is also a solution for reconstruction. Belgium will allocate funds for the reconstruction of the Chernihiv region. And I wonder whether that is some of these frozen assets being used for humanitarian causes to therefore appease people like Austria and and Hungary, who are in the EU but are not up for supplying weapons to Ukraine. I hope everyone's doing okay in a live chat. Right, moving on. Sweden. Now, the biggest news from today in terms of military aid is this Swedish package, and for a whole bunch of reasons. Most of you will probably already know about this, but let's go through it in as much detail as we can. So first of all, before we get there, we're going to talk about, and I did mention this yesterday in one of my videos, but more formally, Sweden has suspended plans to transfer Gripen aircraft to Ukraine. This was stated by Minister of Defense of Sweden, Paul Jonsson. Quote, the other countries of the coalition persistently ask us to wait with the Gripen system. This is due to the fact that now the main attention is paid to the implementation of the F-16 system. Jonsson explained. Now, what's important about this is not coming from the Swedes. So the Swedes want to provide Gripen for obvious reasons. It's good for Saab, it's good for their industry, it's good for their international marketing of their defense stuff, and their kind of international influence, if you like. So Sweden are only saying this because everyone else is saying, hang on, right, there's only, I assume, I'm doing my speculation here, but I assume there's only so many people to train as pilots, and we need to get them into F-16s. If there's going to be, I don't know how many in the end, but there's, say, 85 F-16s is what's currently thought of, with 10 spares for spare parts. So 95 F-16s, 85 flying. But that's over a long time period. That's not all like in July or whatever. So you've got these F-16s on the way. Now, if we're going to have to take a certain amount of people out to train them on Gripen, and if we're going to have to take a certain amount of people out, the pool of people to maintain Gripens and sort out the logistics for Gripens, then we might not just have enough people. We really want Gripens. We want Gripens to come, but we just don't have the personnel at the moment, the pool of people to be able to do that. So therefore, let's just pause on the Gripens for the time being and get F-16 sorted. Now, today, because that's caused some obvious consternation with people who are cheerleading for Gripens, such as myself. I'm like, Gripens are cool. They need Gripens, arguably more than F-16s, but actually F-16s are probably the more sensible choice because more people use them, etc., etc. But Andrei Plakotnyuk, Ukraine's ambassador to Sweden, said that Ukraine still wants the Jazz 39 Gripen fighter jet, despite calls from countries in the air defense coalition to focus on the F-16 program. So it's the other countries that are saying, let's pause Gripens. It doesn't seem to be Ukraine itself saying, hey, let's pause Gripen. So, quote, yes, there are many things we need right now. We need Gripen. We need ammunition. We need air defense systems. We need everything to protect the lives of Ukrainians. It's about the survival of people and the survival of the whole nation. So hopefully what comes out of this is that Gripens are still on the cards. They're just, let's wait until the right moment, until there's enough capacity in terms of getting the Gripens on the ground. Okay, now, Prime Minister, Kiev expects to receive, just to let you know, the first F-16s this summer. There's some people saying June, some people saying July. Who knows? Defense Minister Defense Minister Umarov has also said that Ukraine is anticipating delivery of the first F-16 fighter jets very soon, but he criticized delays in receiving crucial foreign military aid, with only half arriving on time. So whether that's just general or whether that's concerning F-16s, I don't know. So that's your Gripen F-16 thing, right? So Sweden's also announced a new energy aid package worth around $60 million. The Swedish government on May the 28th announced that that package for Ukraine worth 650 million Swedish krona, $60 million. So good stuff there, because of course the energy infrastructure is super important. Then we get onto the big stuff. Okay, so over the last 24 hours, Sweden has announced that they will donate, and this is Paul Jonsson himself saying, Sweden will donate a new military capability to strengthen Ukraine's air defense. Package number 16 will be the largest Swedish military aid package yet, at 1.16 billion euros. So that's about $1.25 billion. Sweden will donate. Well, first of all, some of my Swedish viewers have been saying, I'm really upset with Sweden. I think we need to have done more. And actually, what's happening here is Sweden have done more. And they've done an awful lot more. Some people are saying this is 10% of the Swedish defense budget. In fact, Dom Nichols from the Ukraine, the latest podcast today, said this is a package number 16. So across 2 years, they have given something like 0.68% of GDP, which equates to per year 0.34%. In other words, Sweden, they're a small country. We got to remember that, like geographically, but population-wise, they're a small country. 10 million, is it, or however many in Sweden? The amount they have given might sound small compared to, say, the US, but as a percentage of their GDP at 0.34%, that's in line with what Estonia, was it the Estonian report was suggesting, which is if everyone can give 0.25% of GDP, then we would easily be able to help Ukraine. This idea that Europe is actually quite leisurely supporting Ukraine. The Good Times, Bad Times did a video recently that said, when you look at it, like, Russia is operating at full capacity and is somewhat necessarily dependent on China to get them out of a real hole, but they are operating at full capacity to try and prosecute this war. Ukraine is obviously doing that as well, with regard to, a good third plus of their GDP spent on, or a third of their budget spent on the war. But when it comes to Europe and the US, like, although we post these really big numbers and everyone goes, "Oh, that's a massive number," in the whole scheme of things, Europe and the US are somewhat leisurely supporting Ukraine, which means that we've got an awful lot of headroom. We've got a long way to go before remotely getting on a war footing. There are certain elements of, say, the French industrial military complex that are on a war footing where the government has said, we can tell you what to do in this particular area of making shells, because actually that's really necessary. But in terms of a whole war footing, that's not happening. We're not nearly there yet. So it's so doable that Ukraine prevail. It just takes political will. And we're not there yet, but when you see someone like Sweden presenting a 16th package of this magnitude, then you realize that people really are pulling together, and it gives me great hope going forward. So Sweden, as part of this package, they will donate an airborne surveillance and control system aircraft, so AWACS aircraft, 2 of them, ASC 890. So these planes that they don't have a radar, so they're not 360 degrees. They are, I think, 120 degree and 120 degree. So you have a bit of a blind spot on your nose and on your tail, but if you move around, it's fine. Essentially, these are really good bits of kit that allow Ukraine the capability they need. At the moment, they're using a lot of AWACS planes that are flying in international airspace. If they can get these being used over Ukraine, they can afford to be a bit more risky than a NATO AWACS plane can't fly over Ukraine. They'll be getting involved in the war. This is really significant. As Paul Johnson says, Defense Minister, ASC 890 will provide Ukraine with a new capability against both airborne and maritime targets. Ukraine's capability to identify targets at long range will be strengthened. They will act as a force multiplier, and the introduction of F-16s. This is that significant. So with F-16s coming, you need this, and they are part of the Link 16, so they can do all that communication. You can put it together with air defense systems, with your F-16s, and everything's talking to each other. This is really, really freaking important. The Swedish package today is super cool. It's a lot of money for them, and it shows that they are committed. So when I've had my Swedish viewers get worried, this is commitment. But it's that capability difference. With that comes AMRAAMs. So these are air-to-air missiles potentially used by the F-16. Sweden will also donate its entire stock of armored tracked personnel carriers, PBV 302. Now, these are old bits of kit that went out of use in 2014. So Sweden stopped using these in 2014, but we've seen M113s be used really effectively. So Ukraine can use these. Now, there are 600 and whatever of these that were ordered and technically in existence. Some people are saying 172 are what the Swedish can give. Other people are saying actually it's more likely going to be about 100 of these. Whatever the number is, that's great. Like 100 of these and spare parts going to Ukraine is just brilliant. They can use these for sure. So anyway, to support the reconstruction of new Ukrainian brigades, Sweden will also donate artillery ammunition. So this includes the ammunition they so desperately need, and resources for maintenance of previously donated materials. So that's maintenance for archers and stuff like that. No doubt CVR-90s that they've given. Okay, Sweden will also deliver surplus tank vehicles from the armed forces, maintenance of previous, so I don't know what that means, maintenance of previously donated Swedish material, financial support to capability coalitions, and so part of this might be going to, say, the drone coalition led by, is it Latvia, in coalition with the UK, maritime coalition of Norway and UK, who knows, different coalitions, and to funds and temporary initiatives to enable swift and large-scale procurement, that's a keyword, swift, of material to Ukraine. The Swedish Defence Research Agency will also be tasked with supporting Ukraine in establishing its own defence research institute. Furthermore, Ukraine's command and control capability will be strengthened in the package through a donation of terminals with subscriptions, so one thinks Starlink here for sure, for satellite communications. This is super, super cool. In fact, chuck out your pickled herrings and just get in some, I don't know, some IKEA meatballs or something, and have some IKEA meatballs tonight and just say, or maybe just stroke your, I mean, if I could show you my CD cases here, I've got a massive music collection, and just over there, I've got, I can touch them as a huge CD collection in my billies. I think they're billies from IKEA. I'm going to stroke them tonight, just as a thanks to Sweden. Thanks, Sweden. Because there's nothing like just summarizing an entire nation by reference to a furniture manufacturer and supplier. So I'm sorry to be so insulting, but I will just stroke the billy tonight. Thanks very much to Sweden. Now, let's just give a little bit more detail on some of that Swedish. Wait, are we talking about stroking things at night? Yeah, sorry about that, Robert. We might indeed. I'll probably let's stay on target, Pierce. Stay on target. Let's get back to the tractor beam. Okay. Sweden transfers reconnaissance aircraft to Ukraine. So just let's see if there's anything further that Nets can add here. Sweden will provide its entire stock of armored personnel carriers, air control systems, these AMRAAM missiles, military package. Yeah, I think it's the Panzerband 302. That's the PBV 302. 155mm artillery, AIM 120 AMRAAM missiles that can be used on both aircraft and ground-based air defense systems. These missiles have a launch range of up to 70 kilometers. So all of that's really good news. That's what they have to say. Ukraine battle map adds Ukraine will have 1/3 of the number of AWACS aircraft as Russia has. They will be able to see, right? So these just 2 aircraft. It's thought that with the couple that were shot down and others that were damaged previously of the A-50s, the Russian equivalent, the AWACS, the Russia may have about 6 that are properly operational. Who knows? So Ukrainians are really catching up here. They'll be able to see missiles, helicopters, planes 200 to 300 kilometers into Russia and above the front line. I mean, this is incredibly important. Really will, as mentioned, they will help significantly allow F-16s to know where Russian planes and missiles are and be aware of their airspace. So you will still have a situation, I believe, that the Russians will be able to outshoot F-16s with their aircraft. So they have air-to-air missiles on board that will still be better than the Ukrainian F-16s, as far as I'm aware, depending on what will be given on the F-16s. But I think, although there'll be a very much a getting towards parity in terms of air contesting the airspace, there still will be some elements of caution that the Ukrainian pilots will have to exert when they're flying. And these Swedish planes will allow them to know what's in the air over the contact line and over the Russian airspace for 200 to 300 kilometers. If they can keep those Swedish airframes safe, then they can keep their F-16s safe. That's how significant today is. I don't know if I'm overselling this, but I certainly think it's really important. Shashank Joshi says air power experts have long pointed out that individual planes, F-16s, don't equate to Western air power, which involves a broad suite of enablers and capabilities. In this regard, Sweden's donation of an airborne early warning and control aircraft to Ukraine is very important, or two of them as far as I'm aware. The aircraft in question, the ASC 890 or S-100D, were also fitted with Link 16. That's what I mentioned earlier, the NATO standard communications link around 20 years ago. That means they can talk to F-16s with the same technology, assuming it's not stripped out first. Whereas the understanding that actually some of the delay might have been to the F-16s in giving them those radar capabilities and comms capabilities. As Sir Smeal says, AWACS are a super addition, feed into NASAMS and Patriot for more advanced warning of inbound and guide outbound strikes around S-400 active radar. You might see more Russian planes be shot down near the contact line. Those close support airplanes, or the airplanes that are doing aviation, those guided glide bombs, if they're over Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, you might see some more of those get shot down with the use of these planes. I don't know. It just is kind of frustrating, obviously, that 2 years into the war, these get given. I know it's not I've just given some love to Sweden. I'm now taking it back. No, I think just in general, it's really frustrating that Allied support comes much later. In fact, Zelensky said it right the other day. Everything is a year later than it should have been. So, yeah, really good news. There's been some concern before about Russian access to Link 16 technology, although an AEWC platform isn't going to be flying close to the front line. So a kind of electronic warfare platform that could try and mitigate that. And what else? So another look at some of this Swedish stuff, just a few bits that we can talk about here. It's maintenance, financial support. Yeah. In connection with the package, the Swedish Defence Research Agency, as Paul Jonsson said, will be tasked with supporting Ukraine in establishing its own defence research institute. It's all about, with all of these packages, it's not just about teach a man to fish, give him food for a day, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. This is about not just giving fish to Ukraine. They need to be taught how to fish, or enable them to teach themselves how to fish, which is about supporting their industrial capacity in both terms of R&D and production, so that they can produce indigenous stuff. And of course, the advantage then is if they produce their own weapons, they can use them how the hell they like. So one would hope that in these 2 years, the US and NATO countries have been, if they haven't been giving them missiles to fire into Russian territory, then at least they are giving the technology to the Ukrainians so that they can create their own indigenous stuff to eventually fire into Russian territory. So here's one of the sources that said, according to the military balance in 2024, Sweden had 172 PVV-302s of various modifications and 239 into 2023. So whether they still have 172 or whether it's, as someone else has mentioned, 100, I don't know. But those numbers are floating about. So awesome stuff. And as mentioned, that's 10% of the Swedish defense budget, which is impressive. Okay. Moving on. In Lisbon, so Zelensky's been in Spain, Portugal, Belgium. He's all over the shop at the moment. In Lisbon, Ukrainian President Zelensky and Portuguese PM Montenegro inked a security pact. So there's now, I think, over 10 security pacts. They're working on that one with the US. This will be in some way to replace, or at least stand in place of, a NATO Article 5 agreement, so that if there is a peace negotiation, this is good forward planning. And this speculation for myself, good forward planning from the Ukrainians, so that in the event of them not joining NATO for another gazillion years, if they do peace negotiations and there's a frozen front line, if after 3 years Russia go, oh, do you know what, we are going to attack you again, then instead of invoking Article 5, they can invoke a dozen bilateral security agreements, and those countries can come to help depending on what the agreements say exactly. And I think this one's relevant for 10 years. But yeah, it gives Ukraine a deterrence to Russia, so they don't take a second, or what would be a third bite of the apple. As Zelensky says today in Lisbon, Prime Minister Montenegro And I signed a bilateral security agreement. Document includes Portugal's commitment to provide at least 126 million euros in military aid to Ukraine this year. There's more stuff to come from Portugal, and it also confirms its participation in the F-16 and naval capabilities coalitions, as well as programs for artillery ammunition procurement, mine clearance, and maritime security. The agreement also emphasizes cooperation in the defense industry, intelligence, counter disinformation, and other areas. On a political track, Portugal reiterates its support for the peace formula, bringing the aggressor to justice, strengthening sanctions against Russia, and returning Ukrainian children kidnapped by Russia, and working to establish a compensation mechanism for the damages caused by Russian aggression. Ukraine and Portugal will continue to coordinate and strengthen joint efforts to support Ukraine on its path to joining NATO. So that's good news there. Moving on, the Czech Republic has raised more than $1.6 billion to buy artillery ammunition for the Ukrainians. So on the one hand, this is really good. So the Czechs have put together an awful lot of ammunition for Ukraine. So that's absolutely fantastic. On the other hand, they haven't received that money yet. There's a big difference between pledges and money received. Anyway, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, I think, has declared that the first batch of shells under the Czech initiative may arrive in Ukraine in coming days. So they're imminently going to arrive. Ukraine may receive the first batch in coming days. That's the Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala said yesterday, according to the Czech media outlet Aktualne. Czech President Petr Pavel said in February that Prague had identified 500,000 155mm shells and 300,000 122mm shells outside Europe that could be bought and sent to Ukraine after the necessary funds were allocated. Well, actually, the indication now is they've got more funds, so they could buy more. And what they might be doing, because Estonia then came up and said, well, we've found a further 1 point whatever million shells, or 1 point whatever billion billion dollars worth of shells. So it could be that the more money that the Czech initiative gets, the more they can say to, where are those ones, Estonia, where are those ones you guys found? Okay, we'll add them. So rather than having two separate initiatives, they can just bite into that Estonian initiative. And that means they can get more and more and more. But the problem is they don't necessarily have the money yet. And we'll come to that in a second. So I was wondering how many that would be, the first arriving. Well, apparently tens of thousands of artillery shells procured by the Czech Republic will arrive in Ukraine during June, with the first shipment arriving in the coming days. So tens of thousands in June. Of course, if they are firing at the moment 2,000 a day, say tens of thousands is 20,000, 30,000. That might be 10, 15 days. I don't know. I don't know what tens of thousands will definitely be. But what Ukraine want to be doing is moving up from just securing enough to fire 2,000 rounds a day. They need to be matching the Russians, which is firing, they are supposedly firing 10,000 a day. So they need 5 times as many. Now, remember, the Czech initiative is finding shells that are already manufactured and buying them from stockpiles around the world. What the Europeans and Americans are doing at the moment are ramping up production so that they can keep just having that foundation of supply to Ukraine, and anything else Ukraine can get hold of is a bonus. So it's not like they are only relying on the Czech initiative. They've got the US, the EU, they've got Australia building shells, potential for South Korea, especially since North Korea seem to be going mental now. Are South Korea able to help more? UK, etc., etc. And in fact, the first recorded appearance of 125mm high explosive shells of India from Indian production, SHEII 125mm high explosive, in service in Ukraine. So this could be the first examples of the Czech initiative shells coming through, because we are fairly sure that India was one of the countries. There are a number of countries that don't want to announce that they are giving that they are selling their shells to Ukraine, because they are in, say, BRICS. So it could be South Africa have been hinted, India have been hinted as being potentials here. And they are in an agreement with Russia. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, what are they doing selling their stuff to Ukraine? Well, actually, India don't really care too much for Russia, so they're going to be just using Russia and using BRICS as a means to improve their lot, in this case, financially, economically, and the same with buying cheap hydrocarbons from Russia. It's not doing Russia a favor, it's doing India a favor, and the same with China. So on that same kind of note, General Dynamics in the US, Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems, new 155mm shell body production plant in Mesquite in Texas is open today. US 155mm production is scheduled to increase from 36,000, says Colby Badwa, today. So at the moment, they went up from 14,000 to 28,000. They're now at 36,000. So that's more than 1,000 a day. Most of these, surely, you would think are going to be going to Ukraine. Yes, they do need to backfill their own shell stockpiles since they are giving some to Ukraine. But a lot of those they're giving, say, cluster munitions, are not going to be replaced, right? They don't use cluster munitions, supposedly, so, or they won't. So they don't need to backfill those ones. So anyway, they've moved from 14,000 to 36,000 now. That's really good. And are hoping to get to 57,000 by the end of September. And this factory will obviously help there. This is made possible by new metal parts plant and additional LAP capacity coming online this summer in Kansas. And this is where you look at all of these different states in the US and go, well, there you go, guys. You're talking about, well, should we help Ukraine? Why are we giving money to Ukraine? You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene going, oh, giving all these $1 billion. Actually, most of those $1 billion are staying in the US, and you're paying for stuff in the US to either backfill your own stockpiles or and therefore get newer stuff. So you're paying to upgrade your own equipment, or you're paying for stuff that does get sent to Ukraine, but you're not sending money to Ukraine. You're sending stuff to Ukraine that is being paid for, that is being manufactured in the US, and that becomes a money multiplier in these local places. Right. One of the European countries has ordered a large batch of air defense ammunition from the German defense company Rheinmetall for the Skynex systems. So the Skynex systems are these short-range air defense systems that fire a shed load of lead into the air, a bit like the Gepard, but with one cannon and newer, and can fire really quickly, and then can acquire targets really well and can be semi-autonomous. Anyway, they are a number of those systems are in Ukraine, at least two of them, and possibly more. To think that Rheinmetall have an order for these ammunition rounds, it makes me think that that's almost certainly going to Ukraine rather than being a European country buying for themselves with that new bit of kit. Okay, as part of the drone coalition, Britain has transferred ultra cargo drones to Ukraine, according to Jane's. Ultra is capable of carrying a payload of 100 kilograms over a distance of up to 1,000 kilometers, as well as conducting reconnaissance. Now, here's the thing. The UK could give a 1,000-kilometer drone to Ukraine, and it can be used to cycle around Ukraine and not have to land and do like a bunch of orbits of Ukraine, if you like. Or I guess it could fly over Russia. I mean, this is a big old piece of kit. Would they want this flying over Russia and being lost? But the amount of ordnance that can carry, goodness me. So I don't know how the Ukrainians will use this, but it's exactly the sort of thing Ukraine would certainly like. Or it could be just a drone that's used to supply frontline positions with big bits of kit and saves it, getting it across land or on railway, so on and so forth. Anyway, good stuff from the British there. And then the Foreign Ministry has announced that the Ukrainian embassy in Latvia has sent Bandvam 202. So these are other similar ones to what we saw before, but these are the articulated tracked vehicles to the Ukrainian army. They've been sent a bunch of these before. I think the British have sent their variant of these, number of these. Are they the Vikings? I don't know. The Bandvan 202, produced by Volvo company in Sweden, is used for the transportation of goods and personnel. So thank you to Latvia for that. And then finally, for Ukrainian stuff here, we have the Ada-class corvette, the Hetman Ivan Mazepa, constructed in Istanbul. So Zelensky, when he traveled to Turkey recently to meet Erdogan, actually went and looked at these two vessels being constructed. So one of them has successfully embarked on its first sea trial. Turkey is currently constructing two Ada-class corvettes for the Ukrainian Navy, the Hetman Ivan Mazepa and Hetman Ivan Vyhovsk. And these would have been ordered long before the war started, I would have thought. So because you're wondering why they're building corvettes when they literally can't get these into the Black Sea. And even if they did get into the Black Sea, I assume Russia would make short shrift of these. They would try really hard to sink them, but it does give them a future capability, and it shows it. What you want is Turkey to have a close relationship with Ukraine rather than with Russia. And Turkey speak out of both sides of their mouth, but this is good news, I think, for Ukraine there. Anyway, moving on. I hope you guys are okay in the live chat, having a nice chat to yourself, to each other, not just to yourself. That would be a bit. That's like me talking, isn't it? Because I'm essentially talking to myself. No, I'm not talking to you guys. Anyway, thank you so much for all of you being there. Right. We're now going to go on to a couple of Russian bits and pieces here. So conscription has reached Moscow, says PS01. Quote, and this is coming from, I think, a Russian source here. Unfortunately, they are not giving answers. This is being done deliberately. The boys were taken out of their cover of darkness from May the 25th to May the 26th without completing the documents that should have been completed in accordance with the order. Relatives and friends of the conscripts came to the Moscow Military Registration and Enlistment Office seeking a meeting with the capital's military commissar over the arrests of young people on the city streets. According to the women, since May the 24th, police have caught their relatives of military age on the streets of Moscow and took them to a collection point on Ugreshkaya. Their conscripts, who are now in a point or unit, are appealing the commission's decision, have diseases that must be taken into account when assigning a fitness category, or have deferments from military service. Now relatives are filing lawsuits and turning to lawyers for help. Quote, seeing the pain and despair of the parents, I myself expressed the desire to help them. I talked with the military prosecutor. Now it is necessary to appeal the summonses that are issued to the draft commission of the city of Moscow. Unfortunately, they do not give answers. This is being done deliberately. Boys from 25 to 26th of May were taken out under the cover of darkness without completing the documents that should have been completed in accordance with the order. At the moment, the only chance is to appeal the decision of the draft commission, which was issued at the United Recruiting Point, says lawyer Lyudmila Trifonova. The lawyer advised young people in a similar situation not to sign summonses and not to accept them, to immediately write an appeal to Moscow Draft Board and write complaints to the Department of Health about doctors who ignored diseases during a medical examination. The police are on duty at the scene. There are security patrols on the street near Moscow Military Registration and Enlistment Office, and women's documents are being checked. Okay, what to make of all this? So one, we have, under the cover of darkness, people being taken off the street of Moscow. Two, these people are those, it appears, that already have excuses not to be drafted. So they are supposedly exempt, but they're still being taken. And three, they're being done without the correct paperwork. And anyway, the paperwork would be wrong because these guys should have exemptions. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Russia are somewhat desperate because they are doing all of those things. If they didn't have such a desperate need, they'd be going to other people to get them. And the other point is that this is in Moscow. Moscow is an elite place, and it's a place where you will expect the last of this kind of activity to be taking place. So that it's taking place in Moscow, your liberal city, where lots of people will protest, and lots of the people who work in the Kremlin have their families and they live, and they don't want their own families being, taken off the streets, etc., etc. So I think this, and it's an anecdote, so take it own, pinch of salt and all that. But I think it does tell us that Russia desperately needs troops. And of course they do. There's a labor shortage in Russia. Everything's pretty desperate. They do have a much bigger population than Ukraine, but that population is ostensibly employed and is being put to work to support oftentimes the military project. But they are also going around the world hoovering up people in these different nations, maybe in Africa. We've seen a lot of Africans on the front line. We see a lot of Cubans and Indians and Nepalese, Chinese, so on and so forth. So I think you piece all of this together, and Russia does look like it is in a bit of a desperate situation. And it knows it needs to mobilize, but doesn't have the guts to mobilize. And I understand why it doesn't have the guts to mobilize, because quite frankly, it would be a political disaster if they suddenly had to get 200,000 people, 300 to 500,000 people out of the Russian population, because they're already screwed economically with the labor shortage. Doing that will be economic suicide, and it would be political suicide as well. So they desperately don't want to do that, but that leaves them with very few alternatives when they absolutely need those people. this is just another example. This is a group of Russian soldiers, and it appears that most of them are not Russians. I don't want to generalize here, but I'm fairly sure these guys are being picked up from outside of Russia or inside Russia as migrants that are often picked up off the streets themselves, or they go around like the wild berries. They've done this how many times they've gone through? There's a massive wild berries like commercial warehouse in Moscow area, I think it is, or is it St. Petersburg, where they keep going raiding it because they know they have lots of migrant workers there, checking the papers and then say, oh, you haven't got the correct papers, we're going to whisk you off and send you to war. So there are lots of foreigners who end up in the Russian armed forces, but both due to going abroad as well as getting those people from within their own country. Right, goodness me. Still hope you guys are fine there. There are lots of comments. I have no chance of reading them. Right. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, on the other hand, has said that Russia has 500,000 soldiers in Ukraine. Okay, that's broadly there or thereabouts what they've said right throughout the war. It has increased. And near its borders, and plans to increase the number by an additional 200,000 to 300,000. So I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know how plausible, believable, factual this is. They have supposedly 50,000 in the Kharkiv area, 15,000 in Sumy area, there or thereabouts, and so there's like another 65,000 that's into that. So how many have they got within occupied territories of Ukraine? Of course, not all of these are going to be fighting troops, right? There are going to be many people involved in logistics, involved in military policing, involved in HR and admin and whatever, mechanics. And then does that include pilots and all the mechanics of the air bases, etc., etc.? But they are suffering hugely at the moment, the Russians, attritionally speaking. Now, is this 200 to 300 part of the plans they already have in place in terms of their annual conscriptions, getting them to contracted soldiers, and also doing this crypto and klepto, I'd say, mobilization and getting people from abroad? Or is this a plan to increase by doing a national mobilization? Both countries desperately need a full-scale national mobilization to get anything out of this war. It's absolutely desperate, necessary for both countries. But where Ukraine can do that because they're arguing for this being absolutely necessary in order to continue existing, for Russia to do this is a completely different situation. It's not like they can grab people off the streets because, like, if we don't do that, then the country will stop existing. It's like, well, if we don't continue to invade Ukraine, Russia will still exist. This is like I said the other day, this is frivolous. I don't mean to belittle the fact that people have died in stupendous quantities, but it's kind of like, this is just to appease a dictator's desire to be Peter the Great again. Like, you don't need to do this. No one was expecting it, and it makes no sense. It made no sense then, and it makes no sense now. Like, what are you doing? Ukraine can get away with like mobilizing as many people as they can, and it having to bite that bullet because they absolutely have to. It will screw their economy, but they have no choice. Russia has a choice here, and so if they do mobilize 500,000 people, that is their choice to screw their economy over by prioritizing the intentions of a megalomaniacal dictator over the welfare in terms of death, the lives of his population, but over the welfare, the general well-being of the entire population. You know, Putin is not looking after the Russians. This is obvious, and the more he spends on the war in time and effort and money, the more that Russia and the Russians suffer. Anyway, or as Stephen here says, Peter the Great, more like Putin the Prat. This is indeed true. Right, going on to geopolitical stuff. So I have been talking a lot about the Netherlands. They've been waiting for 6 months now to make a government. When you have proportional representation, you have many parties to represent you, and you move away from two-party systems so that when you have general elections, it is very rare that a single party gets over 50% of the vote. And as such, you have to have minority coalitions that become a majority coalition. So minority parties, all of the parties are minority parties, but you get the bigger ones get to make, or whoever has the biggest vote generally gets to make a coalition of whoever's willing to go into parliament with them. Of course, you all know this. So the Dutch had PVV winning with Geert Wilders, who is a right-wing populist on the end of the spectrum there, and is deeply unpopular with everyone else, and so no one really wants to go into coalition with him. And then eventually he got enough parties and people who wanted to go into coalition, but then it was like, okay, but none of the leaders of these parties can be, because we don't want Geert Wilders to be prime minister and it'd be too divisive. So then none of the leaders of the parties could become prime minister, and they'd agreed on a coalition after 6 months at the last possible time, and then they were wondering who's going to be the choice of prime minister. And this is an interesting one. So the Netherlands is also a technocracy. So a technocracy is where you don't just, so in the UK, we get, so the Conservative government at the moment has a cabinet, and that is where the prime minister appoints a bunch of people to positions of expertise. But those people, like the defense secretary at the moment, Grant Shapps, he's actually doing an all right job, but he's not a defense expert. He has no expertise. So he has to learn everything, which means that when he becomes defense secretary, you then lose expertise of the previous one going, and then you have to get that back up again. Then as soon as he gets good enough or knowledgeable enough, he gets reshuffled, or that party gets voted out or whatever, and cabinet reshuffles. You're like moving people around, and you're swapping out expertise for non-expertise, and then it's just a nightmare. Technocracies, where you get technocrats who are experts in their area, like the Netherlands, have certain people in positions, like an education minister won't be someone from the political party that's voted in, but they select someone like a chancellor, a vice dean of a university, who's an educationalist, who knows about educational policy, and says, can you be our education minister, because we don't have the expertise in our coalition. There's no one here that would make a good education minister, so we're going to go outside the political system, but we're going to pick someone that we think will align with us politically, but we're going to pick you to be our minister. Well, it could be here. So former spy chief Dick Schoof has been chosen as the next prime minister of the Netherlands to lead a populist coalition government that includes the far right. Schoof, 67, who led the Dutch intelligence service AIVD until 2020. Now, this is a really interesting choice, and I've not read anything about this, so this is entirely speculation. So I hope that this makes sense and it's not too far from being plausible. But what you saw with Geert Wilders with the Netherlands are massive supporters of Ukraine, because MH17 was a plane that went down with a load of Dutch people on board, and it was shot down by the Russians. And in The Hague, they including evil Gherkin, they've sentenced 3 people for that in absentia as a war crime, and they don't like Russia. So the Netherlands do not like Russia. However, Geert Wilders, this right-wing populist, was actually, and the PVV generally were being rather pro-Russian, as many right-wing populist parties are in the EU, like, for example, AFD and La Liga and so on and so forth. Okay, so he, in going into coalition, appears to have changed, Wilders this is, his approach to Russia. So he's gone back on not supplying weaponry, and they are now very publicly, the statement that came out in their document said, we are going to continue militarily and financially and humanitarian and politically supporting Ukraine. So that's a 180 shift, and that's really good. And that's probably because of the coalition, and probably reading the tea leaves of the Netherlands Dutch population. But this is fascinating, because if you're going to get a Dutch intelligence person as your prime minister, then this is a person who will know the absolute threat that the Russians are to the information space, to the cyberspace in Europe and with the Netherlands. This is potentially, I mean, I don't know enough about him, but I presume he's going to be anti-Russia, and I presume he's going to be very strongly in support of Ukraine. And this is that coalition, but the PVV and Geert Wilders possibly understanding that they need to put someone in charge of the Netherlands who might tick loads of boxes for their own ideas of maybe immigration and this and that. I don't know this guy, but maybe he fits a bill for some of these right-wing talking points or policy points for the PVV. But actually on something like security which is such a hot button topic in Europe at the moment, both information, cyber security, but also conventional security. To have him in charge, I think, could be a really sensible choice there. So actually, good news there. In fact, someone says, I don't know how true this is, but Fifi Barbara says, yeah, AIVD, so their intelligence service is definitely anti-Russian. And I honestly, I think that is a really potentially a really sensible move to get someone who's not PVV, who's not, who's somewhat neutral, is a technocrat, but going to be strong on Ukraine. Right, Hungary are being hungry, still being hungry. They're blocking the draft negotiation framework for Ukraine's EU accession over minority rights issues. On the 29th of May, EU ambassadors are discussing the European Commission's future talks for Ukraine and Moldova to start accession negotiations in June. And then on top of that, we have Peter Szijjarto, who is just anti-Ukrainian chauvinist and Greater Hungary zealot. So Greater Hungary meaning like going back to what Hungary used to be and actually taking the land from around it. If you remember, Viktor Orban earlier in the war was caught wearing a scarf with Greater Hungary on, as if that's like Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, wearing a scarf that had Australia and New Zealand and Canada as like more formally part of the British, not just the Commonwealth, but actually like, being in charge. Or maybe the US is probably a better example. The US as part of the British Empire, like as if he's like, yeah, we are going to invade the US. Like, so, really controversial, but those sort of people who are advocating that position, you kind of know they're ultra nationalists, right? Anyway, Foreign Minister Szijjarto said, I can tell you frankly that we in Hungary are horrified by statements that threaten to escalate the war. I am horrified by statements that the EU or NATO member states might send troops to Ukraine. I'm horrified by statements about the possible use of nuclear weapons. And I'm also horrified by statements about the introduction of a compulsory conscription in Europe. Okay. Just an answer to that. Do you notice what he's not horrified about? I wonder, I might have to look through his back catalogue of statements to see when he was horrified about a nation invading a sovereign nation that was neighboring in Europe. I wonder if he's ever horrified by a dictator invading a democratic, free and a free and sovereign country. I wonder if he's been horrified with that. Oh no, because he's a plum tool. And in fact, he is a tool of the Kremlin. He continues, one thing everyone can be sure of, as long as we govern Hungary, we will not allow a single Hungarian to be taken to the Ukrainian-Russian front. We protest in the strongest possible terms against the introduction of compulsory conscription in Europe. We Hungarians want peace, and it is clear to us that the road to peace begins with an immediate ceasefire and continues with peace negotiations. No, the road to peace starts with Russia putting their troops out of Ukraine. And you know what? If you turned around and said, actually, we're fully behind the EU, that would be a huge component of allied strength. Hungary is really important to Russia, and if they turned on Russia, my goodness, Russia would be in a lot more trouble. Hungary are a freaking big problem. They're a problem to the EU, and they're a problem for Ukraine, and they're a boon for Russia, and that needs to be changed entirely. Quote, therefore, in our meeting today, I also asked my Belarusian colleague, oh, yeah, of course you did, to do everything possible to end the war in Ukraine. Oh, yeah, of course you asked your Belarusian. Like, why didn't you ask your, I don't know, your French colleague? Why didn't you ask your Portuguese colleague or your Australian colleague? Not that being an EU talk, but you get my point? Like, why go to Belarus to, oh, yeah, no, I know why you go to Belarus. Anyway, let's go back to what some of you guys have said. Okay. And how kind you have been. Kevin Force with 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate your continued support. You are a total ledge. And Lynn, I hope you're well. I hope your health is all right. Big love to you. In Arizona, has gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics membership. Thank you very much. Mr. Lion Dust, likewise, a legend in his own underwear, as we say. And I have no idea why we say that. But anyway, legend. Stop the carnage. Thank you so much for your incredible kindness there. Awesome work, JP, and all of the team. Thank you. And thank you to JR. I've not heard from him for a couple of days, but thank you to JR for all you do. Thank you to Benny Pies doing AI stuff to put together searchable summaries of all of my videos, going back right to the beginning. That helped me so I can search videos where I've mentioned certain things and link them to people when I've already made these arguments rather than having to repeat them. And also thanks to Grimsoft with the Discord channel. It's really great. Pieter van der Reit, wow, 50 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Peter, thank you so much, mate. That is insanely generous. I can't thank you enough. Really cool. Strange trip, isn't it just? I don't know how I've got here, and it is strange, but thank you for being along with us, and thank you for your continued support. Brian Ivy, possibly one of the supporters of the channel I think most of, whenever, as a Republican, whenever I say things against the Republicans or against Trump or anything, I'm thinking, well, how will Brian take this? And what does he think about what I think? I don't know why that is the case, but there you go. Thanks, Brian. Always a great pleasure to have you on board. Ron Rees, remember the children, support Ukraine. Absolutely. And sometimes I forget to talk enough about the children who've been stolen, and some of these war crimes that have just so obviously taken that have taken place, and just we can forget the Mariupol. Like, Mariupol seems so long ago now, and it was so despicable, and yet we're just in this every day that you kind of forget about it. And sometimes this is why it's really interesting to watch 20 Days in Mariupol, and it kind of reminds you of the horrors that have been committed by Russia. And we do need to be reminded, because they are that serious. Johnny Christensen from Denmark, thanks, my friend. Really appreciate your support. And finally, John S. Hit the like button, show Jonathan how much we appreciate his great work. That's very, very kind of you. Finally, actually, Paul Gilbert, the Swedish AWACS are very Raya Nolcom, especially as Australia has withdrawn. I think that means welcome. I think there's some autocorrect there. Especially as Australia has withdrawn the AWACS they had deployed last year. I did not know this. Australia had an AWACS that was was operating in international airspace around Ukraine, and if they'd withdrawn it, that would have affected. I don't know if it's replaced by maybe another NATO plane, so who knows there. But this is really useful for Sweden to have provided these planes, presumably on the basis of the Swedish initiative. So it's all good. That's excellent info there from Paul. Really appreciate that. I've got a couple of sort of questions and comments that I've half come across as I've been talking to you, but it is rather difficult for me to work out what the hell you're all saying here, and I know it's so great. So thank you. Right, we'll continue. President Zelensky is part of the pressure on the President of the United States, POTUS, to attend the Peace Summit in Switzerland. So in a couple of weeks' time, there's Peace Summit in Switzerland. It was arranged after the Democrats in the US had arranged a massive fundraising night where the POTUS and VP, Vice President, are going to be attending. That's how they get the money, and the money translates, they would argue, into influence and votes, and votes is what gets you elected. So there is a simple calculation. It could be that if we go to this fundraiser, we've got a better chance of getting voted in what could be a very tight political race. And that gives Ukraine the best chance going forward rather than Trump getting in, so Biden would say. And we could go to the Peace Summit on behalf of Ukraine, or with Ukraine, and with all the other leaders, and that would set a really good example. But it could also mean that we don't raise as much money and therefore don't have as much chance of getting in. And so at the moment, it looks like he's going to go to the fundraiser. Now, this has caused a lot of people some consternation. I'm not one of them. I actually think Biden going there makes it more partisan an issue in the US, and actually then it's like this is Biden singing rather than this is good, what's good for the US. So if you send someone like Antony Blinken there, I think not only has Blinken just got a better mind for that, he's a younger guy that knows his onions, but also I think it then remains more of in America's best interest rather than in the Democrats' best interest. But other people are like, no, Biden has to go. So I don't know. If you want to hate Biden, of course, you go that route. If you want to like Biden, you might say, that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to give an excuse for Biden not to go. But genuinely, if you said, who would you rather go, Blinken or Biden? Like, as far as actually doing the talking there, Blinken, I don't know how much value Biden being there as an icon to other countries. I don't know how much value that would have as a message to Putin. I don't know whether that would convey a lot more advantage. I don't know. Speaking in Brussels, Zelensky said, quote, President Biden is needed. So he thinks he's needed. Other leaders are looking at the reaction of the USA. His absence would be applauded by Putin. Yeah, and there is that. And that is your counter argument, of course. Right. Swiss lawmakers demand tougher action against spies ahead of that peace summit. So interesting. This is coming from Switzerland, by the way. The motion is seen as a means to curb Russian intelligence activities in the country ahead of the June peace summit, for Ukraine. Interesting that the Swiss are cognizant of the threats to the information space that the Russians present, and this is one of the big challenges I think we face going forward, just in the future. I'm frightened about the future in terms of the amount of manipulation that can be achieved, both internally, but with our own governments and own actors within our own countries being able to utilize things like Cambridge Analytica and how that was used in the US to influence voters, but then outside entities using tools like that, or using bots and using trolls, and now using artificial intelligence. It is becoming a greater and greater threat with each passing week. So the Swiss are right to get freaked out about this. There's been I've not heard much of it since, but there was apparently a task, a team put together, a task force put together in Europe to try and work out the threats from places like Russia concerning the EU elections just coming up this next month, the MEP elections. I've not heard about that since. And then there was a talk about extending that past the elections, so that is just a permanent in place anti-propaganda arm to the EU. I think that's absolutely critical that the EU have that. I think all countries need to have that. I think the UK, and I think we are doing that. I listened to an interview with Ben Wallace when he was Defence Secretary, talking a lot about this. It is such a big threat to us all. Zelensky visited an airbase in Belgium where Ukrainian pilots are trained on F-16 to fly F-16 fighter jets. A video of the visit was published on his Telegram channel, and early on Tuesday, it was known that Belgium were going to supply 30 airplanes to Ukraine. F-16s is all looking good. There's even the news that a number of pilots have finished their training in Arizona. And if I'm not wrong, that means that they are ready to fly F-16s in Ukraine. Like, that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle, assuming that you've got runways and logistics and maintenance teams in place. You need the planes, obviously, in Ukraine. But I don't know that because they're getting trained in different places. So you've got Belgium, as you can see here. You've got UK and France that are training them when they're much further back in there. These are newbies getting trained how to fly before they eventually go, like a year down the line, on F-16s. But you've got experienced pilots that are going to, I believe, Romania, Denmark, Belgium possibly, and the US, getting trained in lots of different places. And I presume like that's the end of their training. So once they're out of training in the US, that's them ready for flying in Ukraine, and that's absolutely incredible. Zelensky met also, as we know, with the Portuguese president, so that's some more of his traveling around. Now, he will meet with France on a working trip next week, in which he will attend the commemorations of the 80th anniversary of the Allied landings in Normandy on June 6th. So, quote, I will have the opportunity when President Zelensky comes to France for D-Day next week to receive him, and at that time to speak very specifically to announce what more we are going to do in support of Ukraine. I'm really looking forward to what he says. I hope that he has something decent to say. Macron is becoming a very, very critical cog in the machine that is the support for Ukraine. He's being big on troops into Ukraine, although there's a bit of like walking back of exactly what's going on there. It does look like there's writing on the wall, I think, for French troops eventually going to Ukraine. He has been big on who Putin really is and who Russia really are. He is supplying weaponry in increased quantities to Ukraine compared to where he was. More Scalp EGs seem to be on the way, cruise missiles, we've got Caesars, etc., etc. But his rhetoric is what is very forceful at the moment. And I think a lot of people could follow his lead. And I think he is trying to lead. He's trying to lead Europe there. He's trying to show Biden and the Americans that actually Europe can do this kind of thing on its own. Like we don't need to live in the shadow, or they don't need to live in the shadow of the Americans in terms of defense going forward. Interestingly, when you just go back, I meant to say something about the Swedish aid package of $1.25 billion today. And I don't think if any of you out there hear someone say the words, Europe needs to pay more, I think we're beyond that now. And if you're not beyond that, you don't know what the frick you're talking about. So if someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Trump comes up with this like canard that Europe aren't paying enough, Europe are paying enough, right? And they are putting things into place in long term as well. So the EU, Norway, Denmark, these countries have put 5-year, 3-year, 5-year plans in place that are significant. And some of these nations are paying considerable amounts of a percentage of their GDP, considerable amounts of their budget. Right, this is big stuff that is happening. And I think that if you're still someone that thinks Europe aren't paying their fair share, then you don't know what you're talking about. The offices of the European Parliament in Belgium and France were searched, according to Euronews. The raids were part of a large-scale investigation into a Russian influence operation in which MEPs were paid to spread pro-Kremlin propaganda. This is brilliant. Let's hope that any kind of influence by the Russians inside the EU is eradicated, is found, and rooted out. Earlier, it was reported that Belgium started an investigation into Russian interference in the election campaign in the EU. And I referenced that earlier with the task force being put together. There are certain people who are being investigated. The AfD have been investigated in Germany, so on and so forth. Now, France and Germany, it's good to see them getting, it appears, closer together. I think that's an image of Sébastien Lecornu and Boris Pistorius there. France and Germany underlined that they're the defense ministers, that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a threat to European security, says French aid to Ukraine. France and Germany are determined to continue support Ukraine for as long as necessary and with all the necessary intensity through bilateral and multilateral channels, including the EU, the contact group, that's Ramstein, for the defense of Ukraine and other fora. The initiatives such as a conference in support of Ukraine in Paris, the Immediate Action on Air Defense Initiative, the IAAD, and the conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine in Berlin on the 11th and 12th of June. They will continue to closely coordinate their military assistance to Ukraine with the aim of providing it with the capabilities it needs to defend itself, restore its territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and secure a free and democratic future. Good stuff there. Some good signaling of, because those two great nations, big, as in great, not an evaluation of how wonderful they are, but the great big powers of Europe, and two of the biggest powers within the EU. You don't want them either doing some kind of brinkmanship. Well, kind of brinkmanship, I suppose, is good when you're trying to outcompete each other to help Ukraine, but you don't want them working against each other, slagging each other off. You want these guys to work together to bring European unity in a big way to support the Ukrainians. Now, Poland has planned to create a 200-meter buffer zone at the border with Belarus, according to Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The announcement came after the Polish soldier was left in critical condition after being stabbed through the border fence with a makeshift spear the previous day. Like, goodness me, just think where we're at now compared to 5 years ago. This is how, like, when I'm going to be giving a talk in North Hampshire, around Andover, on the 15th of June. I'm trying to work out still what my talks are going to be about. It's about the Ukraine war, of course, but kind of like how, like, I've spoken for millions of words on the Ukraine war. Like, how can you condense it down to an hour? And I think what I'm going to talk about is that it's a fun topic of the fact that we're in World War III. And if you were to say, like 5 years ago, the Baltic states will be building defenses along their border with Russia, that's Planes can't land in the Baltics in certain places in Estonia because of jamming by the Russians. That there's a couple of 100-meter buffer zone between Belarus and Poland. That they're building like minefields in the Baltics and dragon's teeth and like stuff like this. You may nowadays we kind of read this and go, yeah, that's part of the course. That's what's happening. But just sometimes you need to sit back and go, where are we at? How are we here? And of course, we're here because of Putin. But it just, yeah, it does. I think it's worth sometimes really understanding how some of these little things are reflective of something that's really, really big. And that big thing is that we are in the stages of I think, a proper world war. Armenia has suddenly blocked Russia's first TV channel. Russia's first is the name of the channel. As the Kremlin continues to lose former allies, says Tim White, new unsuspecting nations leaders, lose former allies, new unsuspecting nations and leaders may be driven by greed or false promises, continue to make alliances with Thailand rushing to join the BRICS group. A bit smashed together English there, but bad news that Thailand is looking to join BRICS. That is certainly a worry. But Armenia, it's you gain one or you lose one. Armenia does seem to be, and Azerbaijan, both seem to be moving away from the Russian sphere of influence. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with Georgia, whether they can successfully get out the grip of the Russian fist there. And yeah, there are nations that are moving away from Russia and others that are moving closer. Unfortunately, Kyrgyzstan here is a nation that appears to be moving closer, marking its sphere of influence is Russia. Here with the foreign agents law that we've seen in Russia, Hungary, and in Georgia recently. Now, the Kyrgyzstan president signs a Russian-style foreign agents law. And that is that's not good news in Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan's been one of these places that has become an export hub for goods going into Russia. And it seems to be moving further towards Russia there. Now, talking about Georgia and its foreign agents law, there's been a great speech, says Michael Clark from Sky News. Well, he's an independent sort of military academic. So great speech from Georgia's president. She's daring the 84 who hold the government to try to close down the views of the 80% of the public and her if they rig the October election. Brave leadership at a vital time for Georgia, with the Russian tanks sitting less than 50 miles from Tbilisi. So what's happening here? So as you know, Georgia's been protesting the foreign agents law. They've got it through. Then the president, not the prime minister, the president, who is against Georgian dream and their move towards Russia, has said, I'm vetoing that. Of course, it can be overridden, that veto, just by those parliamentarians, the 84 that are in the majority. Now, here, let's just have a look at this. So Georgia's president and commander-in-chief, Salome Zurabishvili, spoke first and after pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party overrode her veto on the Russian law. She issued a call for a referendum to determine the nation's future. I think that's a bold move and great. I think if she can drive a clamour for a referendum, then you would get at least some kind of public mandate for the Georgian Dream Party to just kind of do one. It's a very technical term, that. In politics. Addressing the nation, she stressed that Georgia's destiny resides in the hands of its people, not in the actions of the select few individuals within the parliament. 84 Shulavireli or 84 Orjonikidze cannot change. I don't even know what that means, but they are the Georgian Dream parliamentarians, cannot change the future of this country. The future is ours, and I will address what is ours to do. While they might have pressed the button and inscribed their names on the one page of history, we must now do everything to prepare for October the 26th. That's when they vote in their upcoming elections. This will be our response to today's events. Are you angry today? Did today's events anger you? Let's go to work. The work ahead involves preparing a real referendum. Use the energy you feel today to gather signatures. Bring those signatures to me and I will sign this referendum. Do we want a European future or do we want a Russian slavery? 84 people cannot make this decision. We will decide together. Those 84 people are nothing compared to you who are here today. The new Georgia, the Georgia of the future, she declared. Urging unity in action, President Zurishvili called upon citizens to mobilize and contribute actively to the forthcoming October elections. Furthermore, the president underscored the significance of international solidarity, pledging to secure support from Georgia's partners and allies. Quote, and for the youth here today, once you collect the signatures and bring them to me, your main duty will be to defend the elections wherever needed. This is really important because I said the Georgian dream have two options. Either they do an about face and go, okay, we've read the tea leaves of the population and we understand that that's really unpopular. Hey guys, how about we get together and yeah, we will move towards Europe. Or they double down and say, screw you guys, we're going to get the internal security services on you. And if you protest, we're going to give you a bloody nose. And by the way, we're going to rig the elections so that we can't be voted out. They have a choice, one of those two, really. And she's preempting Georgian dream here and saying, you know, if they rig the elections, we need to do, your main duty is to defend the elections wherever needed. Your mobilization, your 500,000 votes and 500,000 votes of our diaspora will be key on October the 26th. Meanwhile, I will ensure that our friends and partners stand with us, as some do not understand who is a friend and who is a century-long enemy of this country. Some of those Orjonkijs might get sanctioned, but the country will not be sanctioned because today the country has shown who it is, where it stands and what it stands for. This is our future. Really strong stuff there from her. That's excellent. It's really important that they don't allow Georgian Dream to rig those elections and that a free and fair election is allowed to take place. Just on an economic front, Deputy US Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo, has arrived in Ukraine. This was reported by US Embassy in Ukraine. So that's good news because there needs to be a lot done in the economic trade sector, especially since the Kyiv Independent reports Western sanctions against Russia have not impacted trade outside of the West, said Hamad Bouamim, chair of the Dubai Multi-Commodities Center, in comments to the Financial Times. So sanctions do work, but do they work enough? As someone here, sanctions never work. The political illusion, they have worked, but you have to keep at them and you have to close loopholes and you have to be very clever with them. And it's a game of cat and mouse the whole time. Yeah, it is difficult. But here's an example where I think sanctions have worked. So Alibaba or AliExpress, which is like eBay. It's a Chinese eBay. So they don't have eBay over there. They don't have Amazon over there. They have AliExpress. And that is moving. I just saw yesterday on cable an advert for AliExpress with David Beckham doing the advert. So they are now evidently in the UK. You've always been able to, I think, buy and get stuff shipped in, but I think they're more formally coming into the UK. And they are obviously a big Chinese concern. Russian media has said that Alibaba has stopped accepting rubles and shipping to Russia. This is where secondary sanctions work. This is where I presume US banks have gone, or the US Treasury has gone, by the way, mate, if you do that, we're not going to allow you funding through here. We're not going to allow transactions through here. So you know you want to get into the UK with these financial, to be a player in the UK market. Well, don't expect to be able to use these financial institutions because you'll be sanctioned from using them if you continue into Russia. So Alibaba, I have to say, right, I presume, and again, a lot of my speculation, I don't know the details. I'm filling in a lot of dots here, a lot of gaps with my own kind of stream of consciousness. But I imagine it's a case of like, right, we've got a choice of getting into UK, getting to this market, getting to that market, and getting to that market, or staying in Russia. And if the US Treasury is saying that's our choice, then really we're going to get out of Russia because Russia's economy is tanking anyway. Are they going to be able to, is that really a buoyant place for us to be operating when we are trying to get into all of these different, we're trying to compete with eBay and Amazon and all these other countries? We're going to have a lot more joy everywhere else rather than just in Russia. Bloomberg has reported that Russian commodity companies, and that goes back to what your man from UAE, from Dubai was saying, yeah, UAE, Russian commodity companies are trying to conduct financial transactions with their Chinese counterparts. I wonder if AliExpress have thought about this. with their Chinese counterparts, have started using a new method of concluding agreements, stable coins. In addition, they began to trade in barter. So good. I'm not even sure what half that means, but it's about trying to find alternatives to conventional payment methods that can be controlled more tightly by secondary sanctions by, say, for example, the US Treasury, etc., etc. So yeah, again, it's that game of cat and mouse, and it's exactly the same in war. It's like, here's a drone, here's a countermeasure. Now we've got to counter the countermeasure. Now we've got to counter the, that's what you're doing the whole time. You're chasing each other around, trying to gain an advantage. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. Thank you all so much for watching, by the way. All 882 of you at the moment. I really appreciate that. Awesome. We're almost at the end. So, hey, lucky us. President Biden, lucky you. President Biden is considering 2 tough new countermeasures. Talking about countermeasures, punishing China for supplying key technology to Moscow. Sort of what we're talking about, but more not in terms of actually not what we're talking about. That's technology in terms of equipment for making munitions. I would also say one of the key things, no doubt, is going to be satellite imagery and intelligence that they're sharing. That is a real issue. But punishing China for supplying key technology to Moscow and lifting limits on Ukrainian use of US short-range weapons to attack inside Russia. So again, we return to the idea that though that is what the US is considering at the moment. It's just a reminder there. Now, according to the Washington Post, Trump has claimed at a fundraising event that he'd bomb Moscow and Beijing if invasions occurred. I mean, I don't know it just seems to me rather a simplistic thing to be talking about. Like, what invasions? Invasions of Taiwan? Would you bomb Beijing? That seems rather inflammatory. At the event, the former president also made a series of audacious fundraising requests, tying multi-million-dollar donations to policy promises. I have a real problem with all of this, but I won't go into my Trump positioning at the moment. I have a real problem. Like, he's struggling with fundraising, although he's catching up a little bit, but struggling with fundraising. When he goes to oil companies and says, you pay me $1 billion and I will give you a policy you want, that is quid pro quo. And that is basically bribery to the highest payer for whatever policy they want, not what you think is right for your country or the world. And I find that absolutely heinous that he has asked for $1 billion from effectively an entire sector to lobby. It's reverse lobbying. It's just asking to be lobbied. Lobby me, give me $1 billion and I'll give you whatever the hell you want. It doesn't matter, because it's just going to help me get in, and all I want is power, because I don't want to go to prison. So yeah, just the idea that he's making audacious fundraising requests means that he is asking to do things for other people in return for money. One sign of how Russia's deepening ties to North Korea and Iran are undercutting UN efforts. Quote, in March this year, Russia closed down a UN panel of experts that monitored compliance with sanctions on North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missiles program. So Russia closed down a UN panel of experts because, well, okay, let's go into this Economist article. We're only going to look at this a little bit, how China is using Russia as a wrecking ball. So in these grim and violent times, it may seem odd to fret about diplomatic dysfunction in the United Nations Security Council, but at its best, that forum is a bulwark against anarchy. Its 5 permanent members, America, Britain, China, France, and Russia, are balanced by a further 10 governments elected on 2-year terms. Responding to crises, both large and obscure, council resolutions have over the years imposed sanctions, peacekeeping missions, arms embargoes, or at a minimum, international scrutiny on tyrants, terrorists, and coup leaders who might otherwise enjoy complete impunity. And what this article is talking about is how Russia has been disbanding some of these organizations that hold people to account, and it's like smashing stuff up. And the idea is that as Russia smashes stuff up, China is the one that benefits. So in each of these egregious cases listed above, so I'm not going into it, involving Syria, Mali, and North Korea, China took an ostensibly moderate stance. So it's not like China's asking to do that and lobbying them to do that, abstaining in key votes rather than joining Russia in a veto. When Russia ended the UN's role in overseeing aid deliveries to Syria, Chinese diplomats privately assured foreign counterparts that they tried to heed off Russia's no vote. Yet fears are growing that China sees benefits in Russia's nihilism. So while China is sort of playing both sides or sitting up and going, yeah, we're not really going to vote on that, Russia does something destructive, and China goes, actually, that is to our benefit. After Russia cast its 3 votes, China joined in criticizing UN sanctions for ignoring the sovereign rights of Syria, Mali, and North Korea. Some African governments voiced alarm at Russia's dismantling of the UN mission in Mali. What you've got to understand, sorry to interrupt myself, you've got to understand the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, where they go around the world like inviting countries to allow them to kind of invest in these countries or get loans from these countries to build stuff. But then when they default on the loans, like Colombo did in Sri Lanka, and the small print is that China gets to take over the infrastructure. And so either China is running this stuff all around the world, or they're just outright owning it because of defaults, and they're just gaining influence and influence and influence. And I guess China will probably, with that kind of way of going about things, they probably will benefit more when countries are in chaos, so they can go up to a chaotic country that desperately needs some kind of investment, some kind of infrastructure, some kind of stability, and say, hey, we can help you with that. And it's their way of getting growing influence throughout the world. I don't know. Again, that's my speculation. Many argue that arms embargoes prevent states from buying weapons, even as rebels arm themselves. In its day, China has found UN peacekeeping missions useful in African countries where it has economic interests, says Richard Gowan of Crisis Group, a think tank. But broadly, African nations are, quote, sick and tired of former colonial powers telling them what to do. And China and Russia are, quote, keen to win over African members, adds Mr. Gowan. In a debate debate about Africa on May the 23rd, China's UN ambassador Fu Kong scolded unnamed Western countries for, quote, adhering to the old new mentality that from the colonial era, wantonly interfering in the internal affairs of African states and always resorting to pressure and sanctions. Russia's wrecking of the North Korea panel of experts shocked UN members. Some 60 governments had called for the panel to be preserved. America, Japan, and South Korea urged China to intervene, but Chinese diplomats denied having leverage over Russia. After Russia's veto, China blamed Western countries for rejecting earlier Sino-Russian, so Chinese-Russian, proposals to ease, quote, harsh sanctions on North Korea. Quote, China leaned back and left the dirty work to Russia, says a diplomat who watched the process up close. The UN panel obliquely criticized China for tolerating North Korean smuggling, but that was not China's main motive, adds the diplomat. China needs stability to prosper through foreign trade, but is, quote, unhappy with the West defining how the UN works, he says. By letting Russia dismantle the old order with its sanctions and monitoring of rights abuses, China can reshape what comes next. China's approach is less dramatic, but surely matters more. And the point for me is when you look at these UN resolutions and votes where they have all these countries around the world voting on different things, look what countries vote for what and what countries agree with China. And you know, it's with the Russian votes, which countries voted. We had Mali and Eritrea, but going forward, which countries will vote? Will there be more African nations in the Sahel region that now align themselves with Russia? Those UN votes, I think, are really interesting and give you an indication of which countries have influence throughout the world. So who is aligned to China and Russia or to BRICS? We are getting into this kind of hegemonic war between, you know, on the one hand, you got the EU and you got the US, and then you got BRICS. And BRICS is an uneasy coalition of China and Russia don't really get on. It's a marriage of convenience. China and India don't really get on. It's a marriage of convenience. But they want an alternative to the US and to the EU, and look at what's going on in Africa and looks what is going on in the Middle East as an understanding of this four-dimensional chess game that is taking place, with, of course, the war in Ukraine taking center stage and being part of that chessboard, where each of these players are playing certain moves. And there you go. That's enough for me banging on for as long as I have. I can barely speak now. I probably need a bit of a drink. A cup of tea would certainly do. Right. What do we have in the live chat? Thank you so much to those who are very supportive. Robert Pitt, hit the like button, team. Thank you, my good man, legend. Ingar Staver from Norway, thank you for that super sticker. Really, really kind. Suzanne Melendi, gifting 5 ATP memberships. Thank you. That's really kind, Suzanne. And Richard Bennett doing the usual as well. Thank you for that, Richard. Always a great supporter of the channel. Let's see if there are any questions or anything. John Larkin, great supporter, says, what peace summit? Should it not be a wake up the West summit? I mean, this is the idea of me kind of talking about how we're in World War III. I'm trying to wake up people. I often talk about it to people who might not know about it in my life, and just give them the realization that, you know, things are more serious now than you might have thought, than things are being communicated through television. I mean, many of us don't even watch mainstream news anymore, and by that I don't mean like we get our news from elsewhere. I mean, there's an awful lot of people that don't watch the news at all, that aren't engaged, that go through their day just oblivious to the fact that there are wars going on. And, you know, ignorance is bliss, and they might be perfectly happy, but it means that when it comes to things like voting, they end up voting for parties on policies that they just have no clue about. There's perhaps a widespread ignorance throughout society, possibly. I don't know if I'm being too negative here, in terms of, you know, how we understand the world around us and what's going on and why our governments are doing certain things. And if you don't understand, then you look at government spending X amount of dollars on military aid to Ukraine. You say, why are you doing that? I don't understand why you're doing that. It's a waste of money. You should be spending it on my hospital or something like that, even though it's coming from different budget pots. And it's just like, there needs to be a greater understanding, which is why I really liked it when Emmanuel Macron sat down and spoke to the country for half an hour to explain how important Ukraine was. I think all of our leaders need to do that in an objective, non-partisan way as possible. Anyway, I digress. John P says, back to your comment on Ukraine being able to use Western weapons on Russian soil. I strongly believe it's America stopping Ukraine from using any country's weapons. Yeah, this is one of the theories, is that US had not only put a kibosh on Ukraine using US weapons, but other weapons as well. And just as I said earlier, hopefully that has changed. That is on the way to changing. Brian Ivey says, JDAM units in service are not going to work with electronic warfare jamming technology by Russia. US Air Force just placed $7 billion contract for next generation of the type that cannot be jammed. So JDAMs are the dumb munitions, or these bombs that have been adapted with glide kits that can be dropped from planes and glide for quite a period and precisely hit targets. But the GPS jamming on board is apparently somewhat easy to jam, and there needs to be an improvement to them. The same with the GLSDB, the ground launch small diameter bomb, the similar ones that are shot out of multiple launch rocket systems from the ground. They are easy to jam, and there are lots of problems with those. And it's a case of possibly having to go back to the drawing board. And this is what you learn from a war like this. This is why it's really important that someone like America, the US, that wants to remain the most powerful military nation in the world, they need to be playing a part in this war. If not just for their own R&D, for staying ahead of the game. Like, if the US hadn't been involved in this war and had allowed like Europe to do everything, then when it came to a war that the US were involved in, they would be behind the curve in what's needed in warfare. This has been incredibly useful for the US military. You need to speculate to accumulate. You need to spend money to get a return on investment, and part of the return on the investment of helping support Ukraine in this war is not only buying the latest equipment for your own army through backfilling. So you have a presidential drawdown in the US where you are drawing down a load of your stockpiles of old obsolete weapons, sending them to Ukraine, and then that money that you've agreed in Congress isn't going to Ukraine, it's going to you to spend on new, better stuff to upgrade your military equipment. And at the same time, you're looking over to Ukraine and saying, what's going on in the war? What are we learning for the war? Right. Then you go back to your military concerns and say, right, these are the needs. These are what we need in terms of drones. These are what we need in terms. This is the kit we need in terms of electronic warfare. And all the time you're invested in this war, you are improving your own capabilities going forward. And it's incredibly important, I think, especially for a nation like the US, where, you know, military prowess is super important. Question: are these shells able to be fired into New Zealand, fired into Russia? They aren't exactly European or US produced ammunition. Interesting question. So what Michael is talking about is, say, I think the Indian shells, for example, or shells that you get from elsewhere. Yeah, I presume the Ukrainians can fire them into Russia without a problem there. The issue is the range. So if you're talking about that buffer zone, the Russians have got sort of maybe 7 kilometers into Kharkiv Oblast, and you're having to sit further and further back from there, and you had to fire over the distance between the front line, there's a contact line, and your artillery piece, and then you got another 7 kilometers, and then you're trying to get that's over into Russia. You're getting, I mean, yes, you can fire some shells into Russia, and they're doing that already. They do that. What you really want to do is be firing HIMARS and guided multiple launch rockets into Russia and ATACMS into Russia. That's what you want to be doing, and Storm Shadows and whatnot. A couple more questions. Do you think and fear that this war will end up turning into World War III? I think we are in World War III, but it's just redefining what World War III or what a world war is. Not redefining it, it's just understanding that in terms of information war and cyber war, Russia are attacking us all. Attacking all the allies of Ukraine. In terms of the war in Ukraine, it's a conventional war. But let's take the US and the UK as an example. We are providing everything to Ukraine other than troops on the ground on the front line. I'd say that we are both providing special forces operatives in Ukraine. And I'd probably suggest there are just a few more instructors and people in Ukraine that we haven't really admitted. That seems to be generally accepted now. So we are actually providing troops to Ukraine. What we're not doing is providing troops on the front line. That's the only thing effectively. We're providing satellite imagery, we're providing weapons, we're providing ammunition, we're providing expertise and training, we're providing medikits and evacuation vehicles and self-propelled guns and etc., 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 and AWACS planes flying around. We are committed to this war. Right, we're in this war. We are effectively fighting this war. We just don't have the troops on the front line. That's the only difference. So, in that very simple sense, we're involved in this war. All the allies are fighting with Ukraine against Russia, but we are also fighting on the information in the information spaces and in the cyber spaces, and that is a war. And then the war involves other countries. So you've got China helping out Russia in ways that allow them to build stuff to fight, to send missiles and drones. You've got Iran, you've got North Korea helping Russia with ammunition and military equipment that is being used to kill people in Ukraine. They're doing that in the same way that we're helping Ukraine. And then you've got trade wars. So we're then sanctioning all these people who are helping Ukraine. We're all doing that. The EU's doing that. The UK's doing that. Canada's doing that. The US is doing that. Right? As far as I'm concerned, in every definition of the sense of the term, we are involved in a war with Russia. This is a world war, and there's a significant number of countries in the world that are involved. I think you've got 50 nations in Ramstein that are supporting Ukraine. You've got basically the entirety of the EU, and you've got Australia and Japan and South Korea kind of helping in their own little ways. I don't mean to be belittling there, in their own significant ways, arguably. So you piece this all together, and this is a world war. I just, yeah, whether it become a nuclear war, I doubt it, but you never can tell. But no, I presume it won't, but because that's rather self-destructive, isn't it, really? Thank you to Joe Hales, great supporter. Thanks, Joe. Often chips in with support, so thank you very much. Joe. And Rick from the Netherlands, really appreciate your super sticker. Always a great supporter and a daily commenter on the thread. So really appreciate that. Right, I am going to have to go and soothe my throat in a second. 110%. World War III kicked off in 2014 and has been building. Yeah, I mean, you can map these things back. It's when did these things start? It's kind of like fuzzy logic. It's what's called the Socrates paradox. There's a philosophical paradox that says that every time You have a sand dune. Every time you take a grain of sand off the sand dune, you say, is this still a sand dune? Of course it is. And you keep taking it off. And there's at no point it goes from being a sand dune to being not a sand dune. And the paradox is you eventually get to 0 grains of sand and it's still a sand dune. So demarcation points are essentially impossible to be objectively true, because we can construct the ideas of what a sand dune is or what a world war is. So if we all agree it's a world war, it's a freaking world war. Like, that's how we do language. Dictionaries aren't prescripted. They don't prescribe to us what words should mean. They describe what words come to mean, which is why you get things like contronyms, that are words that mean the opposite to what they mean. So literally now means metaphorically. So you get people saying he was literally on fire on the football pitch. And you're like, no, he wasn't. He was metaphorically on fire. So now there are certain dictionaries that say literally also means the opposite to literally. And it's because dictionaries are descriptive. They describe how we use language. So world war, like, if we all agree that we're in a world war, we're in a world war. All I'm trying to say is that effectively people just don't realize all the components of the activities that are going on around the world that I would argue build up to the conclusion that we are definitively in a world war. So there you go. That's my bit of philosophy of language and whatnot. Thank you very much for your support. Thanks for listening to me. That's a lot of me talking. Goodness me, I can't believe I spoke for that long, but I did. I hope I didn't bore you too much. As many people say, I told you we're in World War months ago. Yep, I think we've been in World War for quite some time now. But there you go. I still haven't done a mapping update for today. I will try and get that done and get it out to you later. It means if I don't do it today, it'll be 2 days without a mapping update, and I'm sure there's lots of important things that have taken place. It won't be because I don't want to do it because it's uncomfortable news or whatever. I literally, at the moment, don't know if there's been good news on the front line or bad news. I just haven't had time to look. So yeah, sorry about that. Suzanne Melendi, great stream, Jonathan, had a blast. Well, thank you very much for being a part of that. And you can, of course, go and check out Greg Terry, who's going to be live in about 40 minutes, telling you how things are, no doubt, in Ukraine. But yeah, thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Toodle pips. And there is it might not be on this video, but on my other videos, there's an email address for if you're interested in coming to the Andover area in Hampshire in the UK for a talk in June, in a couple of weeks' time. Some people have emailed and they hadn't heard back yet, and it's because it had gone to junk. So I believe those replies, email replies, are going to be coming to you. Really, really do appreciate that. And Wizard of Oz says, great to be here for a live at last. It's great to have you here, my friend. Take care, everybody. Toodle pips. Thanks for all of your support.